sitting here at the Pat and Pearl Lyons farm on January 31st, 1967. And my second eldest brother, Frank Lyons, is driving the international, 1997 it is. And we are helping our brother Pat, laugh, laugh, get ready for the big auction of the farm equipment, which is tomorrow, February 1st. So this is but the lead-in to a little story, and we're going to come over here and get the story of this tractor. This is the Farmall H tractor, which we remember, but my brother Frank will remember it more than I, and he can tell a little bit of the history of this story. History of this tractor, actually.
Well, this Model H International Harvester was the first new tractor that our father ever bought. He farmed pretty much with horses up until the time this was bought. And it was bought just after the beginning of the Second World War, which meant it had steel wheels, it had no starter, you had to crank it by hand. So this was the biggest thing in our lives as young children, to have this piece of new machinery and not have to harness up those horses and feed them all the time. So I think I'm going to stop now, and then Dave, who's running the video camera, will come over, and he will focus in on the check for the tractor, because that check was still available. Pat found it recently, so the check, I believe it was for $600 for this new tractor. So, well, I'll comment on this check. It's dated August 20th, 1942 for $663 to the Binns Implement Company, which I think was in Gayville. It's signed W.F. Lyons, my father, but it says by Mrs. W.F. Lyons, and at the bottom it says New International Harvester H Tractor.
Now, Frank, when Dad bought this tractor, I believe it had lugs. Is that what we call those?
Bob,
wheels?
if you had been listening, as I just introduced this, yes, indeed, it had steel wheels, lugs.
Well, you said steel wheels, which.
All right, with lugs, yes, yeah. All right. You win, Bob.
And he could not get the rubber tires until after the World War.
That's right. I would say it was probably about 1946 when he put rubber tires on. He put a starter on and a battery because it ran with a magneto, and he put a new gear in the transmission, so in that it had rubber, it could drive at road speed. Road speed was about 16 miles an hour.
Well, now, prior to this, I can faintly remember the old Waterloo, which, for impressing the people in the East, I tell them this. I said it really wasn't a tractor so much as simply a source of power. I remember it being parked in where we fed the livestock. It was used more for the engine. We didn't exactly pull implements.
That is correct, for its pulley, but not to tow equipment. It was so large, heavy, and unwieldy that I think towing equipment, it would have used most of its energy moving itself and had little to tow anything.
Well, possibly at the end of today's taping, we'll go in and take a little video of the models that Pat has acquired of various tractors, including the model, including the, what am I trying to say? The Waterloo. I'm thinking of the Model T also.
I might add, having worked for John Deere for well over 30 years, that the Waterloo boy from Waterloo, Iowa, was purchased by John Deere in 1918. And they produced very briefly the Waterloo boy and then switched to a John Deere design, a big heavy pull tractor called the Model D, and that went on to the vast Waterloo works today where all of the larger John Deere tractors are made at Waterloo, Iowa.
Well, I think every Lyons boy, all of us, we learned to drive, or I learned to drive, the day your leg, by stretching, could reach to that clutch was the day, which probably we were even 8, 9, 10 years old.
Except for some of the more precocious ones like our brother Tom, who learned to drive on John Deere and Minneapolis Moline tractors because they had a hand clutch. And he could stand there even at 5 years old and move that hand clutch. What would OSHA have had to say if they had existed at that time?
Yep. We're standing here in front of what I remember as the chicken coop when we were growing up here on the farm, but we're looking at the sale bill for the Pat and Pearl Lyons Farm Machinery Auction, which will happen tomorrow, Saturday, February 1st, 1997. Pat Lyons, my oldest brother, is here looking over the sale bill. And this has been posted in all the fence posts and the laundromats of Yankton County and points beyond, and we expect many people from all parts. But maybe as a starter, we could get a fast little summary of the history of this farm, which Pat knows quite well, and some of my other brothers standing here. Now, I think Mother and Dad, Bill and Mary Lyons, bought this place with our grandfather Donahue's assistance in 1929.
That's right.
And you were about 1 year old when that event happened. Do you remember much about that?
I don't recall many of the details of the purchase. I heard about that later.
Well, maybe you can lead us backwards and then we'll go forwards. Then, so in 1929, Mother and Dad came here. You were the only one they had at that time.
Yeah. I think probably they had an idea for Frank. I don't know why they went ahead with their plans. But anyway, he did show up a year or so later.
He was at least a bit of a twinkle in Dad. We assume Dad's eye. Well, at that time, I think you told us they bought 120 acres here.
Yes, for $21,000.
For $21,000.
Which was really quite a sum in those days. And then, of course, during the 30s, I don't know what the value would have been. All close to nothing, really, because of the Depression and the drought. And when land values, between the combination of the two, it was really tough times. But somehow, I guess our parents raised 7 of us and paid for that 120 acres through those tough times. I don't know what their secret was, but we didn't consider ourselves poor folk.
Not at all.
We were just like everybody else. We lived like everybody else.
I think we were part of the secret. It was called a built-in workforce.
Yeah.
A very reliable workforce, I think. Well, so shortly, let's see, Frank was born in what, 1930? 1930. And if Mother were here, she would say, and that stork kept coming almost every year.
Yes.
Until 1937, when I was the last one out with my twin sister. Maybe we'll rattle off names for posterity.
Yeah,
so Pat is our elder brother, and Frank.
Yeah, Frank, come on in here.
Is in Rock Island, Illinois, and we think of him as our John Deere brother. And Brother Gene, we think of him as our bug and horse doctor brother from Lexington, Kentucky. And Brother Jack is our music brother. He'll be along later. And Brother Tom, he's another one of our engineer brothers from Texas. And I'm Bob from Boston and Maine.
Bob, I don't think you did justice calling Gene the bug and horse doctor. In reality, it's Dr. Lyons, who's a professor at the University of Kentucky. And there he studies bugs and horses.
That's right. And we got all of these interests nurtured here on the farm.
Right.
Well, our grandfather, Donahue, our mother's father, helped our parents buy this farm, I believe.
Yeah.
With a generous, I've always realized the secret of buying anything is in the down payment.
Yeah.
And I believe he gave in a $6,000 assistance.
So that would leave a balance on the contract of $15,000, which they paid off during World War II, from 1929 to World War II. I don't know exact year.
But actually that was paid off in about 14 years, so it was paid off fairly rapidly by today's standards.
Well, as you say, it is all the more remarkable since our grandfather Lyons lost his farm, having paid it off, put it up for collateral in 1934, I believe, or thereabouts, and lost it. So our dad must have felt, you said, must have felt a very, how did you tell
He
that?
must have felt very fortunate to have had such a fine farm and to have not lost it.
Absolutely. I don't know how they did it.
Because it was truly desperate at that time. There was hot winds, no rain, and no economy.
Yeah.
They lived in an economic desert at that
Well,
time.
I wonder, now you were here, what in the world did they raise those first years?
Us.
Corn.
Us. When they weren't doing that.
Corn,
I mean,
small
you
grain,
think of
and
how
alfalfa.
did they get through the first year?
Yeah, well, you know, the cash flow was the cream in the egg check back in those days. I mean, that's what brought the groceries and even paid the hired man.
They discontinued their checking account. They disconnected the telephone. And Mother told me they kept their cash, which was usually under $1, in a tobacco can on a cabinet. And that's what they had to go on.
Of course, you raised your own food pretty much probably here. You know, we figure a garden.
Well, what did we raise? We were almost self-subsistent.
Other than the garden for the house, what was raised was corn, small grain, and hay, and hogs and cattle and chickens. I believe those were the crops.
Yeah, that would cover it in those days.
Well, all 120 acres were in crops.
Yes.
Well, yes, they were, with the exception of what's out for the farmstead.
This part of South Dakota, this part of Yankton County is one of the richest.
Yeah.
Now, you told me farmers down in Kansas and South would buy your hay over the years because it was such rich, fertile hay.
Well, that's true even today.
Well, when did we go from 120 to 160 acres?
Well,
180?
in 1948, I believe, Louis Johnson had a heart attack, who was a neighbor, and he decided to quit farming, so he sold 60 acres more to our parents. And then our first purchase was an 80 acres, Pearl and mine, and 80 acres joining this. And then in later years, we bought this, and then we bought other land later on.
One of the pieces of land you bought, Pat, was Uncle Jack and Aunt Helen's farm on the James River, and that was 240 acres?
Oh, 220 acres. So there's 500 acres in the farm today.
Well, now, when this farm was in the fullness, when we were all kids here, and before we got the H, it was mostly by horses?
Yeah, horses and the Waterloo Boy,
And
the
Waterloo
tractor
Boy.
to grind the feed. It was never used for anything else but grinding feed.
So we had...
Dad liked horses.
Yep.
And I didn't think he'd ever get around to buying a tractor.
Yeah?
I think I would add, assuming that the historians have some interest in this tape, Pat, that although you owned 500 acres, when you were at your peak of farming, you rented or leased 500 plus other acres. So this was an economic entity of up to 1,200 acres, as I remember over the years.
When we were at our peak at probably 1,500 acres, which you had to have to be able to afford the combines of those days that cost $50,000. Now they cost $200,000 for the same machine.
May I add on that subject, Pat? I think you had a lot of business acumen to lease or rent the land, because land here was selling for, I believe, up to $3,000 an acre, and it really was a foolish investment. So you never got drawn into that. You found the extra land that you needed to make it economically viable by leasing and renting the land.
Well, we should go back one step here, because we didn't really state, in 1960 our dad died, and Mother